There is a particular kind of exhaustion that nobody talks about. Not the tiredness that comes from working too hard or sleeping too little. This is the exhaustion of constantly translating yourself, of explaining your decisions, softening your opinions, and reshaping your personality so that the people around you feel comfortable enough to stay. You have probably felt it, the quiet drain of being endlessly available. The way you rehearse conversations before they happen, choosing words that will not offend, that will not push anyone away. The strange guilt that arrives when you finally say no to something. And underneath all of it, a question you rarely say out loud. Why does none of this seem to earn the respect I am looking for? Here is what the philosophers understood long before modern psychology gave it a name. Respect is not something you can argue your way into. It does not respond to effort the way most things do. In fact, the more visibly you pursue it, the more reliably it retreats. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations that a person who constantly seeks the approval of others has handed the keys to their own peace to strangers. He was not being harsh, he was being precise. When your sense of worth depends on how others respond to you, you are not living your own life. You are performing in someone else's theatre, hoping for applause that may never come. This is where most people get stuck. They believe that if they just explain themselves clearly enough, if they are just patient enough, generous enough, available enough, eventually the people around them will recognize their value. But that is not how human perception works. And Machiavelli, for all his reputation as a cold strategist, understood something deeply human about this. Machiavelli observed that people form their judgments not from careful analysis, but from impression. They respond to what they perceive, not to what is true. And one of the most powerful impressions a person can create is the impression of not needing anything from you. Not because they are indifferent, but because they are complete. There is a difference, and people feel it immediately, even when they cannot name it. Think about the people in your own life who carry the most natural authority. Not the loudest ones, not the ones who dominate every conversation or constantly remind you of their accomplishments. The ones who hold your attention are usually quieter than that. They speak when they have something to say. They do not rush to fill silence. They do not explain their choices unless they choose to. And when they disagree with you, they do it without apology and without cruelty. They simply hold their ground. What you are responding to in those people is not charisma in the conventional sense. It is coherence. Their inner world and their outer behavior match. They are not performing a version of themselves designed to manage your reaction. They are simply present, as themselves, without negotiation. Dale Carnegie spent decades studying what makes people genuinely influential, and his conclusion was not what most people expect. He did not say that influence comes from being impressive. He said it comes from being genuinely interested in others, in ideas, in the world. But there is a crucial distinction buried in his work that often gets overlooked. Interest is not the same as need. You can be warm, curious, and engaged without being desperate for a particular response. The people who are most magnetic are those who give their attention freely but do not require anything back. That freedom is what makes them safe to be around. And safety, in social terms, is the foundation of trust. Now here's the part that tends to make people uncomfortable. If you have spent years being the person who over-explains, who overgives, who absorbs the emotional weight of every room you walk into, the shift toward quieter self-possession can feel like coldness. It can feel like you are becoming someone you do not recognize. You might worry that pulling back will cost you relationships, that people will think you no longer care. But consider what the Stoics would say about that fear. Epictetus, who was born into slavery and spent his life thinking carefully about what freedom actually means, drew a sharp line between what is within our control and what is not. Your character, your choices, your values, these are yours. The interpretations other people place on your behavior, these are not. When you begin to live from that distinction, something remarkable happens. You stop editing yourself for an audience that was never going to be satisfied anyway. And the energy you recover from that, the mental space, the emotional clarity, becomes visible. People notice it, even when they cannot explain what changed. This is not about becoming cold or withholding. It is not about performing mystery or manufacturing distance as a tactic. Machiavelli has been misread for centuries by people who mistake his observations for instructions. He was describing how power operates in human relationships, not prescribing manipulation. The lesson is not to deceive. The lesson is to understand that your value does not require a sales pitch. There is a particular kind of invisible labor that quietly exhausted people carry. Comfort at the expense of your own honesty. Of laughing at things that are not funny. Of agreeing with things you do not believe. Of making yourself smaller so that others feel larger. This labor is invisible because it is never acknowledged, rarely noticed, and almost never rewarded with the respect you were hoping it would buy. The Stoics called this kind of self-betrayal a failure of reason. Not a moral failure. They were not interested in guilt. A practical failure. You are spending a resource, your authentic self, on a transaction that does not pay out. And the longer you run that transaction, the more you train the people around you to expect it. They do not respect the version of you that is always accommodating, not because they are cruel, but because that version never gives them anything real to hold on to. What changes when you stop? When you let a silence sit without rushing to fill it? When you decline something without constructing an elaborate justification? When you disagree without immediately softening it into agreement? What changes is that people suddenly have to reckon with you as a real presence rather than a comfortable backdrop. That reckoning is where respect is born. Carnegie understood this in his own way. He wrote about the importance of making people feel valued, but he also understood that you cannot make anyone feel anything if you have no ground to stand on yourself. Influence flows from a stable center, and a stable center is not built from other people's approval. It is built from a clear and honest relationship with your own values. This is the quiet truth that sits at the heart of Stoic philosophy, Machiavellian observation, and Carnegie's social intelligence, even though they arrived at it from very different directions. Person who needs nothing from the room is the person the room cannot stop watching, not because they are performing detachment, because they are genuinely, visibly at home in themselves. If you have been carrying the weight of other people's comfort for a long time, this is not a call to drop it all at once. It is an invitation to notice the weight, to ask yourself, honestly, which relationships in your life require you to be less than you are in order to function, and to consider, gently, what it might feel like to simply be present, without the translation, without the performance, without the apology. You do not need to explain your worth, you only need to live it, and the people who are meant to see it will. And if this spoke to a part of you that rarely gets heard, stay with that feeling for a moment. You are not broken because you feel deeply. You are only beginning to understand yourself. Subscribe to Inside the Labyrinth for more reflections on the hidden patterns of the human mind.